Mukutan Gorge, late morning. The fires had already passed, leaving a blackened stretch of hillside still smoldering in parts. Rangers moved carefully across the ash-crusted slope, checking for flare-ups and injured wildlife. Then, from behind a scorched acacia stump, something small and unsteady emerged. A lion cub, no more than a few weeks old, pulled itself forward through the soot, each step dragging. Its front paws were raw and darkened, the pads clearly burned. The cub did not cry out. It just moved, slow, trembling, and alone. Elias was the first to notice. He raised one hand to halt the others and crouched low, squinting through the rising heat. The cub paused, swayed, then collapsed fully onto its side. From a distance, it looked like a fallen piece of ash. Only the faint rise and fall of its chest marked it as alive. There were no adult lions in sight. No tracks, no prints, no warning calls. Just silence and smoke. Elias stepped forward cautiously, wrapping a damp cloth around his hand. He knelt several feet away, waiting, watching. The cub stirred once, not to flee, just to turn its head as if seeking shade. Its eyes were barely open, fur matted in patches of soot and ash. The nose was dry. The whiskers had curled slightly from the heat. He placed the cloth gently on the ground, then dripped water from his canteen just beside the cub's mouth. The tiny jaw twitched. One lick, then another. A second ranger retrieved a field blanket from the truck and returned without a word. There was no rush. Every movement was careful, measured. The cub didn't resist when Elias slid the blanket underneath. Its body was limp but warm. He lifted it with both hands, cradling it against his chest. A faint groan came from the cub, the sound of discomfort, not fear. Elias whispered once, barely audible, "We've got you." In the back of the rescue truck, they laid the cub gently on a canvas mat and shaded it with a fold of cloth. Water was offered again, this time through a soaked strip of gauze placed against the lips. The tongue moved slowly. Breathing remained shallow but rhythmic. Back in the gorge, the team made one last sweep of the hillside. Still no adult lions. The nearby trees were singed, branches skeletal. If the mother had been nearby when the fire began, she was gone now, pushed out, scattered by flame, or worse. The cub had likely followed scent or heat, crawling blindly through the smoke until it collapsed. They knew what was at risk. Without a mother, the cub would not survive on its own. Without immediate treatment, the scorched paws could worsen. Infection, dehydration, organ stress. If he didn't accept fluids or start moving by nightfall, he wouldn't last until morning. Elias returned to the truck and checked the paws again. The front pads had cracked, revealing pink beneath the char. A medic applied antiseptic gently with soaked gauze, working between the toes. The cub flinched but didn't pull away. "He's holding on," someone said quietly. Elias didn't answer. He was focused on the slow pattern of breath, the small movements of muscle along the spine. Life was present. Barely, but present. They would drive north, toward the holding outpost. The journey would take just under an hour. Each bump would hurt, each jolt a risk. But waiting wasn't an option. If the burns dried further, the tissue would stiffen and the cub might lose function in both paws. They moved quickly but with care, strapping the mat securely, checking for shade. Before the truck rolled forward, Elias sat beside the cub for a final moment. He placed 2 fingers gently on the ribcage, counting each breath. 4, 5, 6. Still shallow, but steady. As the engine started, dust rose behind the tires. The scorched gorge fell away behind them, quiet again. In the bed of the truck, under the edge of the blanket, the cub stirred once, not rising, not crying, just a slow curl of one paw against the fabric. A gesture of instinct, not recovery, but it was something. And in this place, something was enough to keep trying. The drive ended in silence. The engine's rumble faded as Elias stepped out and lifted the bundle into his arms again. The cub hadn't moved since the gorge, not even to shift its weight. Its head rested limply against the side of the canvas, jaw slack, eyes dull. The roadside trees near the outpost cast thin shadows across the clearing. They laid him down beneath the widest one, on the softest patch of earth they could find. There was no sound but wind, and in it the faint, bitter trace of scorched fur. Elias unfolded a towel soaked with clean water and draped it over the cub's back. A second cloth, cooler, was pressed gently beneath the belly, absorbing the residual heat. The cub didn't flinch. His body lay in full surrender, legs extended, tail limp, breath barely noticeable. No cry, no resistance, just waiting. He knelt beside the small body and twisted open his canteen. The rim touched the corner of the cub's mouth, and water trickled down over his chin. A few drops landed just inside the lower lip. The cub's tongue shifted once, not a lap, just a motion, then stilled again. "If he doesn't drink more soon, his kidneys might start failing," murmured the medic nearby. Elias didn't look up. He pressed his fingers gently along the ribs, counting again. Still shallow, still slow, but still breathing. The pause remained the worst. Pink flesh had begun to swell around the cracked pads, and though disinfected, they looked angry under the light. Burn wounds this severe would take weeks, maybe more, to heal. And if infection set in, it would spread fast through a system this young. The outpost had no intensive unit, only a shaded pen and a table with clean linens. They had already radioed ahead for veterinary assistance from the reserve headquarters. But that team was at least 4 hours away. The only thing to do now was wait and keep the cub alive through it. A second ranger brought a syringe without a needle, only saline and sugar solution, and Elias used it to place drops just inside the cub's mouth. Most ran out again, but some remained. It was enough to buy time. The wind picked up slightly, tossing dust across the clearing. The fire was still visible in the distance, smoke lines rising thinly above the blackened rim of the gorge. It hadn't reached the outpost, but the stench had. Burned bark, cooked leaves, scorched hide. Elias kept his face turned away from the wind as he worked. Beside him, the cub gave the faintest twitch. Not a full movement, only a shift in the haunch as if trying to curl. Elias paused. The blanket was adjusted slightly, pulled tighter over the back, and another drip of water pressed against the mouth. A faint moan escaped, high and raw, not from fear, but fatigue. "If he survives the night," Elias said softly, "he might have a chance." But there was no certainty in his voice. The cub's eyes blinked once, heavy, slow, then closed again. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sun shifted behind the acacia. Elias remained kneeling, hand on the flank, monitoring the warmth of the body. Still faint, still holding. The stakes hadn't changed. If his organs gave out, there would be no reversing it. If the burns deepened, they risked permanent damage. If dehydration pushed further, sleep would turn into a coma. Everything balanced on what the next hours brought. Or didn't. The ranger didn't speak again. He only poured another trickle of water, adjusted the cloth, and sat back. The cub stayed where he was, unmoving, breathing, waiting. Somewhere far off, a bird called once, then went quiet. The wind brushed the trees again, and the bitter scent lingered in its wake. By early afternoon, the wind had dropped, but the air remained heavy with the scent of ash and charred roots. The fires in the gorge had cooled overnight, leaving behind a valley stripped of its color. Nothing moved across the wide black field but heat. Elias walked slowly along the edge of the burn, his boots brushing through layers of fine gray soot. Every step left a perfect print, undisturbed. There were no lion tracks, no bird calls, not even the usual buzz of flies. The search had to be done anyway. If the cub's mother had escaped ahead of the fire, she might have circled back. If the pride had moved to safer ground, there could still be a trail. But after an hour, the signs remained the same. No fresh scat, no drag marks, no blood, nothing but wind scoring the empty trees. Another ranger called from the far ridge. Elias turned and shook his head once. Nothing. They met at the gorge's edge where the scrubland thinned, and the earth was still warm underfoot. They searched again, this time lower, near the gully where survivors might hide. The undergrowth had burned to the roots. No shelter, no shade. The team split in slow lines, moving in silence. Over the radio, one ranger mentioned an old watering path 2 kilometers east. They marked it, circled back, and searched that route as well. But the trail was dry. Cracked mud, no tracks. The fire had erased every trace of movement older than a few hours. Back at the outpost, the cub cried once, a high, hoarse sound that rose and fell in seconds. The medic stepped to the edge of the shade and listened, but no second call followed. Just the creak of tree limbs shifting. Just the sound of air. Elias returned late in the afternoon, face streaked with dust, hands still blackened from the gorge. He crouched beside the cub, who had not moved from the towel. The eyes opened at his scent, blinking slowly, not fully focused. There was no strength in the limbs, only tremors beneath the skin. The nose twitched once and the jaw fell slightly open. He lifted the paw gently to check the swelling. The burned pads had cracked further at the edges, but the bandages held. Elias wiped the corner of the mouth with gauze soaked in saline. The cub didn't flinch. He only released one more soft moan before going quiet again. They had no proof the mother was alive. No signs of distress calls, no scent trails. And in these conditions, a lioness wouldn't leave her cub unless she had to, or unless she was already gone. That thought was not spoken aloud. The vet team was still 2 hours away. Fluids had been administered carefully throughout the day, but the cub had taken in little. His breathing remained steady but shallow. The risk of infection had not changed. The risk of internal damage remained high. If they waited too long, the body could shut down even with no external signs. As dusk crept closer, Elias moved the cub again. The clothes were replaced, the shade relocated to the inside of the rescue truck. It would be easier to monitor temperature changes there, easier to keep out insects, easier to transport if another fire warning came. The engine stayed off. They weren't leaving, not yet, but they were preparing, just in case. He laid out a clean gauze bed across the back bench and lifted the cub slowly, one hand under the belly, the other supporting the head. The body weighed less than expected. The ribs shifted visibly beneath the fur. The cub gave no cry this time, just a single breathy exhale. Elias sat beside him again and waited. The wind rose briefly, stirring the trees, then fell still. In the distance, a few vultures turned circles in the warm air, but on the ground, in the burned valley, on the cracked trails beside the tree line, there was no sign of pride. No answering call. No paw prints leading home. Only ash, silence, and the slow breath of the cub beside him. Twilight settled over the outpost as the wind changed. The cub lay inside the open shelter, wrapped in gauze and soft cloth, the scent of iodine faint beneath the heavier smell of ash. A small lamp hummed beside the bench, casting a pale yellow glow over the cub's chest, which now rose and fell more rhythmically. Elias sat nearby, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the rise of each breath. It was not strong, but it was regular. The vet team had radioed again. Their arrival now under an hour. Supplies were ready. Fluids, topical gel for the burns, a formula feed prepared in case the cub regained enough strength to swallow, but no one moved quickly. Every shift, every whisper was quiet. Still. Then, without warning, from somewhere beyond the ridge, a low sound broke the silence. A roar, long, hoarse and broken at the end. The tone was unmistakably female. Elias looked up. The medic froze mid-step. Another ranger near the gate tilted his head and listened hard. The sound came again, closer this time. Raspy, not from strength, but strain. A lioness calling through exhaustion or injury, not dominance. The hills surrounding the gorge echoed faintly, bouncing the sound across the open plains. Then came a pause. The outpost fell quiet. No one spoke. The cub stirred once under the blanket, a twitch of the flank, no more. Elias rose and stepped out of the shelter. The air outside was cooler now, though smoke still drifted from the far edge of the valley. The sun was down, but the sky remained red along the horizon. He moved toward the northern fence, heart beginning to pound. Not from fear, but from something closer to hope, still guarded, still uncertain. The cry came again, louder, then abruptly cut off. Not a challenge. Not even a full roar, just a reaching sound, one drawn out over distance and pain, then swallowed in the hush of the land. And it did not return. He walked slowly to the eastern slope, careful not to make sudden movements. The brush there was thin, but the burned trees cast deep shadows. The wind carried no scent strong enough to track, and no movement stirred the low branches. He waited in stillness. The cub inside the shelter did not cry. He made no sound at all. His body remained curled beneath the blanket, burned paws barely visible from under the fold. His ears twitched once, a delayed reaction, or perhaps nothing more than reflex. Elias stayed at the fence for several minutes. He scanned the ridge, the sky, the dark line where the brush thickened again. Nothing moved. The quiet settled in full. Behind him, another ranger stepped forward but said nothing. "She might be close," Elias said finally, voice low. "Or she might not be." They couldn't know. The call could have come from 10 kilometers away. The hills sometimes played tricks with sound. It might have been the cub's mother. It might not. But the tone carried no aggression, only exhaustion. Something searching. The cub had begun to tremble lightly beneath the towel. Elias returned, replaced the edge of the blanket, and gently ran a damp cloth down one side of the back. The heat under the fur was mild, not spiking, still within safe range. No fever yet. What remained at risk hadn't changed. Without identification of the pride, there was no reunification plan. If the lioness was indeed his mother and came too close, she might panic. If it wasn't her, they risked drawing another predator into range, and if no one came at all, if the roar was just an echo of something already lost, the cub would have to face recovery alone. The light in the sky began to fade fully, and the trees turned black against the last line of red. Elias sat again. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The shelter remained quiet except for the shallow breathing beneath the gauze and the slow rhythm of wind against the outer gate. The roar did not come again. But now they all knew it had been there. The sky dimmed into slate as dusk drew close, and the ridges that bordered the outpost turned a quiet red before fading into shadow. The smoke had thinned, now just a faint gray curtain beyond the eastern slope. Elias remained beside the shelter, seated cross-legged on the ground, his back resting lightly against the outer beam. Inside, the cub slept under a clean blanket, breath still shallow but no longer strained. The burns on his paws had begun to dry, the skin curling at the edges where ointment had been applied. No new signs of infection, no fever. Still weak, still at risk. A sudden shift in the birds overhead caught his attention. The trees beyond the gate fell silent. One by one, the doves flew off. Then, from the top of the far ridge, something stepped out of the brush. A lioness. She moved slowly, each step dragging just slightly behind the other. Her head hung low, eyes focused. The fur along her flanks was patchy, blackened in places from soot or old burns. She was lean, but not starving. Her ribs showed in the way of a lioness who had gone without eating, but not without purpose. She paused at the edge of the slope and lifted her head once to catch the wind. Elias remained still. The lioness did not growl. She did not move closer. Instead, she took one more limping step forward, then another until the line of the outer clearing came into view. The fence was still a dozen meters away, the shelter another 5 beyond that. She could not yet see the cub, but she could scent him. Her breathing was heavy, rough at the end of each inhale. One ear twitched sharply, reacting to a rustle behind her, though nothing followed. Then she sat, not suddenly, not as a challenge. She simply folded herself down into the grass at the ridgeline, facing the outpost directly. Elias shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his position so that his body blocked the cub from view. He did not reach for his radio. No sound passed between the rangers. One had already moved into position near the gate. Another was near the medical unit, watching silently. The lioness did not rise. She lay with her head lifted, shoulders high, tail still. Her chest rose and fell in slow, labored rhythm. Her eyes remained fixed forward, toward the smell of her own kind. Inside the shelter, the cub stirred. Not from sound, there had been none, just a twitch of the ear, a shift in the paw. Elias turned slightly to watch. The cub's nose lifted once into the air, then dropped again as sleep returned. The lioness moved once more. Not closer, but down. Her head lowered into her front paws. She let her weight shift to one side. No growl, no sound, just presence. Just breathe. If it was the mother, she had come from fire and loss. If it was not, she had come for a reason still unknown. Either way, the danger had changed. If she charged, they could not stop her in time. If they sedated her, it might break the fragile balance of this moment. And if she stayed, if she waited, then something might still be possible, but only with time. The light faded further, turning everything gray. A single cricket started to chirp near the base of the fence. Elias exhaled slowly, almost soundlessly. The lioness remained exactly where she was, on the ridge, breathing, watching. Close enough now to see the shelter, close enough to see the cub sleeping inside. But she did not move. Not yet. She had come this far, and now she simply waited. The first light came pale and cold, casting long blue shadows across the clearing. Morning mist still clung to the grass when Elias stepped from the shelter. He had not slept. Neither had the lioness. She remained on the ridge through the night, never approaching, never leaving. A silent shape in the distance, unmoving, alert. The cub had rested quietly, body curled tight beneath the blanket, breath light but steady. At one point near midnight he had twitched sharply and moaned, the first clear sound in hours. Elias had responded with a soft cloth over the head, a fresh dressing on the paws. The burns had not worsened, but the skin was dry and infection still hovered close. Nothing had changed the risks. They were simply passing through the hours between them. Now, with dawn rising, the lioness moved. She rose without sound, first to a crouch, then standing fully, slow and deliberate. Her back legs trembled once beneath her weight. Ash still clung to the fur behind her shoulders, darkening her coat into uneven streaks. She stepped forward. Elias did not call out. The other rangers, already in position, held still behind the fence corners. No rifles were raised, no tranquilizer prepared. The lioness made no threat. She walked down the slope, step by step, until she reached the edge of the fence. No growl, no snarl, only the sound of her breath, ragged from smoke, as she lowered her head and pressed her forehead once, lightly, against the wire gate. It was not a collision, not a push, just contact me, a gesture. She remained there, nose close to the ground, her brow resting against the metal mesh as if to feel what lay beyond it. Then she pulled back and lay down fully, paws outstretched facing the shelter. Her body made no more movement. Only her eyes stayed open, watching. Inside the shelter, the cub shifted. His back paw twitched, his ears turned. Elias knelt beside the entrance, eyes moving between the two. No sound passed. No one stepped forward. The lioness did not rise again. She did not roar, did not demand. She simply remained, still, breathing, present. There was no protocol for this, no plan for a wild lioness arriving, unmarked and unsedated, pressing her head to a man-made fence. But the moment asked for nothing. No action, no interpretation, only stillness. The risk remained. If they opened the gate, she might charge. If she saw the cub too soon, her instincts could fracture from trauma or confusion. But if they waited, just a little longer, they might learn what she had already chosen. Elias watched the cub. I watched the small ribs move, watched the lioness. She was not moving now, not challenging, not pacing, only waiting. In the gentle hush of morning, the wind stirred. The mist lifted. A single call of a hornbill echoed across the clearing. The moment stayed whole, quiet, impossible, and real. The lioness blinked once, the gate held, and nothing more was needed. The morning passed slowly. The lioness did not leave her place at the gate. She did not growl, did not pace, did not press again. She remained in the same position, body low, paws flat, eyes fixed on the small form just visible through the shelter opening. Every so often, her ear twitched or her breath hitched, but otherwise she was still. Inside, the cub stirred more than before. His front paws shifted. He tried once to rise, failed, and lay back again. The burn dressings were intact, the swelling had not returned, but his strength was shallow. What kept him moving now was not the medicine. It was something else, something he could sense just beyond the wall. Elias crouched in the entryway, hand on the wooden beam, eyes moving between them. The team had argued quietly before dawn, some fearing risk, others sensing trust. No decision had been easy, but now, with the lioness unmoved and the cub showing signs of response, they chose the only path that kept the moment whole. Elias stepped to the gate and unlatched it. The sound was soft, just a dull clink of the bolt. The lioness lifted her head slightly but did not rise. She did not move. Her eyes followed Elias as he stepped back, slowly, hands down, silent. The gate swung inward with a long, tired creak. The path between them was open. Inside the shelter, the cub sniffed the air, first one paw extended, then the other. He dragged his body forward with effort, stopping just past the blanket's edge. The wind carried the lioness's scent to him now, strong, sharp, unmistakable. He paused, trembling. Then he moved again, inching over the smooth floor, leaving faint streaks of salve from his wrapped paws. The lioness stood, finally. Her body unfolded with care, as though every joint resisted her. She stepped once, then again. The cub crossed the threshold of the shelter and emerged into the dust. His head was low, breath short. He didn't look up. He only kept sniffing, inching forward through instinct alone. 5 meters. 4. 3. The lioness moaned, a low, raw sound that cracked at the end. She stepped forward and lowered her muzzle. They met just beside the gate. Her nose touched the top of his head gently. She sniffed once along his neck, then along his flank. The cub pressed his body into the contact. A small cry escaped his throat, thin, weak, but real. She did not roar. She did not lift him. She only stayed pressed against him, breathing slowly, her chest expanding and collapsing against the dust. Her tail flicked once. Her back leg trembled slightly, but she remained steady. Elias did not move closer. He only stepped back, quiet, eyes lowered, giving space. The other rangers stood far behind. No one spoke. The two lions stayed close for several minutes. The cub did not try to walk again. He only pressed himself along her forelimb as if absorbing heat. The lioness closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. What they had done was not finished. The burns were still healing. Infection could still set in. But the bond, whatever had once connected them, was not broken. Not by fire, not by distance, not by the thin line of wire that had separated them overnight. Now, with that line gone, the cub had reached her, and she had chosen to meet him. Quietly, fully, without hesitation. The sky was pale overhead, the dust was still. And in the calm between breaths, the reunion was held. Soft, imperfect, real. By late morning, the light had softened, no longer harsh against the burned earth. The gorge, once blackened and cracked, now lay quiet under a pale sky, with only thin strands of wind tracing the low trees. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the gate, the lioness still rested beside her cub. Neither had moved for hours. The shelter had been left open. No barriers remained. Elias watched from the shade, crouched near the fence post, arms resting lightly on his knees. The other rangers had pulled back to the far trees, giving space. No one approached. The vet kit, though still open, hadn't been touched since sunrise. There was nothing more to do. The lioness stirred first. Her body shifted slowly as she rose to her feet, not with force, but with effort. Her front legs moved steadily. The back right gave a slight tremble before it caught. She turned her head once toward the cub, then took 2 slow steps forward. The cub looked up. He didn't cry. He didn't hesitate. He rose. The motion was awkward, the back leg dragging slightly as he adjusted to the bandaged paws. But he stood, wobbling but upright. His small body leaned for balance. The wind lifted the edge of the gauze, and still he didn't sit again. He took 1 step, then another. The lioness waited just beyond the gate. She did not look back until the cub reached her side. He brushed lightly against her leg, and she lowered her head to meet him. They moved together now, first across the clearing, then toward the open gorge. Her pace was slow, uneven. His steps were soft, cautious. But they did not stop. Elias did not follow. He only stood now, eyes fixed on the 2 shapes as they crossed the ash-gray grass. He watched the cub limp gently behind, sometimes catching up, sometimes slowing. The lioness led without pressure. No calls, no glances back. Just presence, just motion. The sun crept higher, warming the blackened ridge ahead. Charred trees cast thin shadows along their path. Vultures circled distantly, but none descended. The gorge, still marked by fire, welcomed them quietly. When they reached the first bend in the slope, the lioness paused. Her head lifted. Her body turned slightly east. Then she walked on. The cub followed. Elias kept his gaze steady. No one moved behind him. The truck remained parked, the supplies untouched. The only sound was the rustle of wind through the dry leaves. Then the 2 lions crested the ridge. For a moment they stood outlined against the light. One large, one small, one limping, one unsteady. Then they disappeared down the other side, into the gorge. No farewell, no roar. Just a long curve of quiet earth and 2 sets of paw prints in the ash. Elias remained where he was, hand resting lightly on the gate. The tracks would fade by evening. The fire had burned much, but not all. Some bonds, even after heat and silence, still found their way back. And now, they are gone. Into the gorge again, together.